Good morning. This is Faith in Our Hometown, brought to you as a community service and sponsored by Mercy Hospital, Joplin. And now, here is your host, Father Jay Friedel.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Faith in Our Hometown. We're glad you've joined us for another Sunday morning of conversation that I really think hopefully affects us in a good way here in our greater Joplin area. This morning, my guest is going to be Bill Fleischaker, who is the president of our local synagogue. As many of you may recall from the news in the last few months, we had some tragic shootings. And sadly, that's not unusual anymore because we're having tragic shootings all the time, but some of those have some religious overtones. And so I'd like to talk about that a little bit with Bill today. The shootings that happened in Pittsburgh were because folks were attending a Jewish synagogue and for Jewish prayer and services. And so I'd like to talk a little bit about how that looks here in our own area, whether we've still got maybe some anti-Semitism here in our area, and what we can do to, again, bring our community closer together. We're going to be right back after this Mercy Minute, so don't go away and join us again this morning with a talk with Bill Fleischaker from our local synagogue.
I was in shock, and in denial, and I couldn't believe it was me. I was healthy, feeling well, but unbeknownst to me, after the colonoscopy, I found out that I had colon cancer. My name is Mario Guerrero. I'm an ethicist. I help people that are in a hospital and the medical staff process some of the difficult situations. In this case, it was the other way around.
Well, I'm glad they caught it earlier.
On my 50th birthday, I had a regular checkup. I wasn't concerned because I felt well. No family history of this type of cancer, and yet I developed this type of cancer. During the process of the colonoscopy, they were able to remove that polyp. And having that done within the hospital setting, they can just address all the issues right there and then. I'm a great believer in early detection. This is such a silent disease, and you really don't necessarily have symptoms. Go get checked. Follow up with your physician. Don't wait.
Well, again, thank you for giving up part of your Sunday morning to spend it with us here at Faith in Our Hometown. We're always grateful. Again, I love seeing you out in the community, and I love hearing your ideas whenever I do get a chance to see you. I was talking with Bill during the break, and he told me to make a correction. He is not the president of our local synagogue. He is the treasurer. His brother is the president. His brother, Jim, is the president. So, Jim, no offense this morning. We're not trying to take your job away from you. We'll let Bill continue to count what he needs to count there for the synagogue. But it's good having you with us. Last time you were on was probably a couple years ago.
Right.
And we had some conversations about, death penalty and some other things at that point in time. But I really wanted to talk with somebody from your community about what's life been like for you all? What have you all been thinking about in the aftermath of those shootings in Pittsburgh a few months ago?
Well, certainly it wakes us all up. We've been looking at ways to provide security. We're more aware of that now. We lock our doors now when the service starts, and if people want to come in late, they have to ring the doorbell. So we are taking extra precautions that we haven't been taking in the past.
Yeah. Do you think that, just in a general way, taking precautions, because obviously, in an era of heightened awareness, do you think that some of the members of the community really feel unsafe in some ways because of what happened?
Well, I think it's more a wake-up call. I don't know that people feel any more unsafe. And, frankly, the odds of somebody coming to a small synagogue like we've got in Joplin and doing something are extremely small. But by the same token, because we're aware of the situation, I think there's a need. People feel a need for more security. We're not going to go to armed guards and things like that, but just common sense things. Times have changed.
Yeah, and it is. We live in an era where hate speech, unfortunately, is becoming a little bit more prevalent again. I thought we'd gotten away from some of that, but I think we're in some ways returning to it.
Well, I think the norms that prevailed for decades, and we have to remember we had my parents' generation fought in the Second World War. There was a lot more coming together of blacks and whites and minorities and so forth. And for a long time, that feeling prevailed in this country. And I think now we've got younger generations who aren't as familiar with the Holocaust and some of the things that have taken place in the past. So I think the social norms, the condemnations against anti-Semitism and racism and so forth have kind of rolled back a little bit.
What do you think we can do to kind of roll them back forward again?
Well, I think, for one thing, community leaders speaking out against it so that people who would be willing to engage in racist comments and activities and so forth realize that there is a social taboo and that it's not a popular thing to do. And I think the more that people speak out, the more that people let it be known that this is socially unacceptable, this is not the norm, then I think the willingness to engage in that type of conduct will be reduced.
Well, I would hope so, and I hope we can continue to speak about it, whatever forums we get. I know that that's one of those things that I just years ago decided, that whenever those kinds of things started to come up in a conversation, whether, when people would just start mocking some section or some part of society or some other group that they labeled as them versus us, that I just, I get to that point where I'm like, okay, I just can't keep my mouth shut anymore.
Sure.
I gotta continue to say something. And, and I guess some people would expect that from a religious leader, okay? But I think we all get a little complacent from time to time,
Well, I think, we've become obsessed with political correctness. We have leaders who are afraid to speak out because they might offend this group or they might offend that group and so forth. And I think sometimes you have to take a little bit of risk. And like I said, I think if our leadership, local level, national level, international level, will speak out more against it, then I think you'll see it roll back.
Well, I hope so. Because I keep trying to speak out, and I encourage everybody else to too, even in your own homes. That was always the scariest when I'd say something, when my dad would say something, and I'd just be like, "Now, John Friedel, you're not supposed to be talking that way." And he'd go, "I know." He said, sometimes, it's old habits, and I'm like, okay, and again, those were simple things. My dad really wasn't I don't think he was really a racist or a bigoted person at heart, but he grew up hearing all those things, and every once in a while those things would still creep back into his vocabulary once in a while, and I just have to say, that's not, and he'd be like, I know. I said, okay, but I just, when I first started doing it, when I was in my, my teens and 20s, I was like, oh, this isn't going to be fun. Nobody likes to be the one to, to kind of throw that out into the middle of everything because, you always seem like the watchdog or something like that. But I just think it's something that we all can't afford not to do.
Right. Well, and in this geographic area, a lot of us grew up hearing things said by other people that wouldn't be acceptable in today's conversation. And some of it was ignorance, some of it was old habits. But again, I think we've become more aware. Part of it is being aware of the fact that when we do things like that, how much we hurt somebody else. Mm-hmm. And I've had black friends tell me phrases that I use that I didn't even realize had racial overtones to them. Mm-hmm. Were offensive. Right. And they weren't saying that to me to be mean, they were just informing me.
Right, just like, do you realize when you say that, this is what comes to mind, or that's where that came from, or right. Do you understand? And I think, I will say that, when I, teaching world religions, and we'd start talking about the reality of anti-Semitism,
right?
Kind of an irrational fear of, or hatred for, or mistreatment of, a particular group of people, and especially Jewish people in this
right.
regard, people of Jewish descent. And somebody said, well, some of that stuff's in the Bible, and I'm like, okay, but like everything else, let's look at where some of that came from. And does it really translate to the 21st century? In terms of some of that, but some of that language was in there is what people used to justify it for years, and I still got to say, I don't think it's still justifiable, especially if you really do your homework and figure out where that came from and figure out, okay, all right, that was, some of that was an historical moment, but does that give us the right to, condemn people or put them in a box for 21 centuries later,
Right.
When for something that happened 21 centuries ago. So like the specific thing I'm speaking of here, in terms of that is just like, well, the Jewish people killed Jesus. And I'm like, well, yeah, but there wasn't even such a thing as Christianity at that point in time.
Right.
So it was us, in some ways, joining, us in the persecution of someone who was making it difficult at that particular moment in time, who was rabble-rousing. And so we joined, but that was all us at that point in time. There wasn't a Christianity versus a Judaism when those things were happening. In the early first century, some of that started to kind of divide, because that's that's when our roads diverged,
Right.
those who thought Jesus was the Messiah, those who didn't. And so again, our folks, for the first foreseeable years, even after the time of Jesus, they did the synagogue and their own services then the next day, They did a synagogue service on the Sabbath, and then on the Lord's Day, the next day, they'd turn around and do the other one. We didn't have a separate at that point in time. And then the conflicts that were occurring there is what somehow got written into some of what we've got in those passages when they did begin to part and to do those things. So, some of these things were prejudices from the first century.
Right.
That are hard to really translate with any real meaning into the 21st century.
And then it became, sometimes it's been socially expedient. I read some of the writings of some of the early, some of the Nazi leaders, people besides Hitler, Goering, and so forth. And I didn't realize until recently the connection in Germany in the 30s and 40s between their hatred for communism and their hatred for Jews, because they identified Jews as being the communists. So it was easy, it was expedient for the leaders of the Third Reich to put anti-communism and anti-Semitism together. And that was how they fanned the people. And so a lot of people who in Germany might not have normally been particularly anti-Semitic supported what was going on because they were anti-communist.
Yeah. And again, those things kind of get conflated, and then all of a sudden you've got an excuse for picking on a group or hating a group or bad-mouthing a group or whatever.
Right.
And again, I think very misguided, but unfortunately, some of that hatred through a misguided, impetus is kind of a sad reality that's still with us, which is, again, where you wind up with people like what's happening in Pittsburgh, recently. Right. We're going to have to take a quick break here. This is Faith in Our Hometown. We're going to take a quick break. We're talking with Bill Fleischaker about anti-Semitism and some of the reactions of our Jewish brothers and sisters right here in Joplin. So stick around, and we're going to be right back after a real quick break. Okay?
You're watching Faith in Our Hometown on KSN TV, brought to you as a community service of Mercy Hospital, Joplin.
Well, again, thanks for giving up some of your Sunday morning to be with us here on Faith in Our Hometown this morning. Our guest this morning, Bill Fleischaker, who's from our Jewish Synagogue right here in Joplin, right around the corner from me at St. Peter's. Okay, right. So we got that downtown corridor and those old churches and old congregations that when Joplin was getting settled, we had the Jewish one, we had the Catholic one, we had the Methodist one. We built places back in those days, and Joplin was excellent at this. Build in places so that everybody who had a religious background had a place to be and felt welcomed in Joplin at that point in time.
Right.
I think that's the tradition I'd like for us to continue to build on here in Joplin. But let's recap a little bit for some of the folks who might not have known. Why don't you recap from your vantage point what you saw happening in Pittsburgh, and then again how that affected you guys as a community here?
Well, I think what we saw happen in Pittsburgh was a demented person who, for whatever reason, who knows, background, developed a hatred for Jews, and to the point where he was willing to lash out, go to a Jewish community, go to a part of Pittsburgh where there were a number of congregations and a concentration of Jewish people, and start killing people. And so I think that it's not, you encounter people who have deep-seated mental problems. Mm-hmm. And you're not going to, the average person who might be somewhat anti-Jewish or anti-Semitic isn't going to go to those extremes. But I think you see people like that who are sick people who somehow feel, because of the atmosphere in the nation these days, that maybe what they want to do is not going to be condemned by everybody. And so the normal constraints that they might feel against going in and murdering a bunch of people don't apply. So they feel like, yeah, I'm going to go do what all these urges I've had all these years have been telling me to do. So I think what we talked about earlier in the fact is that there seems to be throughout this country, and in fact, it's not just the United States, it's a worldwide movement. You see it in Europe, both with Jews and with Arabs. A feeling that it's okay to be against this minority or that minority. Plus, I think there's a fear that as the whole world becomes more racially mixed, you have people who are Caucasian and fear that they're becoming the minority. So there are so many forces at work in the world right now. But from our standpoint, to bring it more locally, I think we saw that as just a terrible tragedy, something that was called for people to speak out and do something. So, and congregations throughout the country organized services, community services, memorial services to remember those who had been killed in Pittsburgh. And our own synagogue did that, and we had a wonderful outpouring of people from the community. Our own congregation is very small, but we filled the entire sanctuary and part of the balcony with a huge crowd of people who just came there to express their sympathy to our congregation and to the Jewish people of Joplin over what happened.
Right. And I mean, I know that's what, my desire was when I made the phone call, was just to speak to the people from your congregation that I knew and have worked with, and I said, I'm just really terribly sorry. And I couldn't be there that night, but I knew there were people from our congregation going. And I was glad, because again, you just want to, at a moment like that, in solidarity, anytime anybody is persecuted because of their religious beliefs, I think that ought to strike at the heart of all of us who have religious beliefs. What would happen, if suddenly somebody came after us just simply because of the way that we prayed or because of the way that we believed? Right.
And over the years, we've had somewhat of a good working relationship with the Islamic community locally. Right. Because both religions are minority religions, both of them have their origins in the Middle East, and the fact that the rest of the world seems to think that Jewish people and Islamic people ought to be at each other's throats. We've actually made a lot of effort between the two communities in Joplin to show that that's just the opposite, that both minorities support the others. And the Islamic community was one of the first groups to send condolences to our congregation after something happened. And but the nice thing about something like this is that it's you had people who were of the Islamic faith, Christian faith, probably even some people who were some atheists there, all who came out just to express their support for the Jewish people in our community.
Right. And again, to me, that seems to be more at the core of what our historical roots were. Our historical roots were here in Joplin. Back in those early days when everybody was trying to just help everybody get established and find a home and a place to be, a place where they could raise their families and worship as they saw fit and to do those things. I mean, I think that's when we're at our best.
Well, I think so. I'm a third generation Joplinite. My grandparents came here around the turn of the last century, and they were business people here. Most of the Fleishakers who were large in number 80, 90 years ago have drifted off to other parts of the country, and we're down to just my brother and I. But they've always been accepted in this community, and I don't think anybody has ever, I've never personally encountered anybody who's been expressed to me anything negative about my religion.
Good. Well, that makes me happy. But again, I think we all need to stay on guard, as we were talking about earlier, that we never let down our guard in denouncing racism, in denouncing, religious intolerance. We can all believe what we need to believe and still find a way of supporting one another, right. In our right to be able to do that as citizens of our country. I mean, that's one of the beauties about this great experiment that we have, that is the United States, is that we do have religious freedom and we do have the opportunity to worship as each one of us sees fit.
Well, I think there are a couple of things. I think sometimes those of us who are in a minority have a little bit of hesitancy to speak out and express that. As a younger person, I never made it a point to point out my religion to people. As I've gotten older and more mature, maybe I'm proud of my religion, and so if someone says something derogatory in my presence, whereas when I was in my 30s, I might have not said anything because I didn't want to offend them. Now I would speak up and say, not in a mean way, but to point out that what you're doing is wrong and what you're saying is wrong. And so I think you've seen that movement. I think you've seen people of minority faith more willing to express that and not be ashamed of it or embarrassed about it or feel like it's something totally private. But I also think we have to be aware that there is an undercurrent. And I had a friend of mine point out to me not too long ago that there were a number of swastikas and anti-Semitic slogans and painted on a concrete wall in a part of the community, not particularly visible, but that's something new that hadn't been there. Now, whether it was just kids, it doesn't really matter whether it's kids. They were painting swastikas and they had Stars of David with lines crossed through them. So even if they were 13-year-olds, they still knew what the significance of what they were doing. Yeah. So,
or at least thought they did.
Well, yeah. Well, they knew it had to do with hatred.
Right. They knew it had to do with hatred, and they knew that it had to do with saying, no, we don't want this other group.
Right.
Yeah. And I think that, again, that's just one of those things where I hope that we never lose our ability to speak what we see as a much larger truth to people who might otherwise stir up those kinds of feelings.
Well, I think, again, I've lived in Joplin all my life. I think the thing is I think when you look at the overall picture, we have a whole lot more in common than we have different.
Sure.
And we may have different political persuasions, we have different religious persuasions, we come from different economic backgrounds, but one of the nice things about Joplin, I think, is the fact that as a general rule, we are supportive of each other.
Yeah. has always been what I found. Like I say, especially when I look back to the early history of this great city in our area. We might have had pockets here and there, but for the most part, we've done pretty well. I will say that there was an era in town here where the Klan was very strong and were very up against Catholics, and so
Right.
we had some conflicts in there. But that's not what we would describe as the overarching history. We had a few moments where things came into some conflict, but overall, I think our greater truth certainly speaks to the fact that we have gotten along fairly well and that we do fairly well together. Yeah, my guest this morning is Bill Fleischaker, who's from our Jewish synagogue here in town. We've been talking a little bit about anti-Semitism and how we might continue to stick up for each other as a great community that allows each other to coexist. We're going to be right back after this Mercy Minute.
Everyone on board dreamed of a new life in America. The Sisters of Mercy had a different dream: to serve all who had need. From the first hospital Sister Frances Ward built to the world's first virtual care center, we continue to answer the same call: to bring mercy home to you. Mercy, in every era, your life is our life's work. Learn why we serve at mercy.net/legacy. When they discovered there was no hospital, the Sisters of Mercy built one, as they had so many times before, offering healing and hope on the edge of the frontier. Mercy continues to answer the same call: to bring care wherever you or your child need it most. Mercy, in every era, your life is our life's work. Learn why we serve at mercy.net/legacy.
Well, again, our conversation this morning a little bit more somber than we sometimes care for on a Sunday morning, but a good reminder to all of us that we do have a good community here. We have a community where we can coexist with different beliefs, but yet supporting each other in the right to worship as each one of us sees fit. We do have a history of cooperation here. We do have a community where our Muslim brothers and sisters will coexist peacefully with our Jewish brothers and sisters, and our Jewish brothers and sisters can coexist peacefully with our Christian brothers and sisters. We don't want a situation that occurred in Pittsburgh to ever happen here to any of our congregations. And of course, we've got some of the history of that intolerance, where people get a little bit on the edge. We need to continue to speak a louder message in our community that those kinds of things have no place here among us. Let's continue to pray for each other. Let's continue to treat each other well. Let's continue to reach out to each other in peace, goodwill, and in love. Join us next week for Faith in Our Hometown. Happy Sunday.
Thanks for watching. Faith in Our Hometown can be seen Sunday mornings at 6:30 and 9 a.m. on KSN. Brought to you as a community service and sponsored by Mercy Hospital, Joplin.